Title: They were considered alpha until humans eradicated them all. Part 1. For thousands of years, the Cathar ruled the stars without question. They were tall, strong, and covered in thick armored skin that shimmered like polished obsidian. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and their voices rumbled like distant thunder. Every species they met either bowed before them or disappeared. The Cathar believed they were the natural rulers of the galaxy, born to lead, built to conquer, and destined to stand at the top of all life. They called themselves the Alpha, not as a title but as a fact as certain as gravity or time. Their empire, known as the Dominion, stretched across dozens of star systems. Massive warships patrolled the void, their hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. On their homeworld, Xylos Prime, towering spires of black metal pierced the sky, and great arenas echoed with the roars of warriors proving their strength in brutal combat. The Cathar valued power above all else. Weakness was not just frowned upon, it was erased. Their society had no room for mercy, doubt, or compromise. To them, the universe was a ladder, and they stood at the very top. Far away on a small blue-green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, humans were just beginning to look beyond their own skies. Earth had spent centuries fighting itself. Wars over land, belief, and resources had scarred its surface and its people. But after a near-catastrophic global conflict in the late 21st century, humanity finally chose unity over division. Nations merged into a single governing body called the Sol Conquered. They pooled their knowledge, rebuilt their cities, and turned their eyes outward. Within 100 years, they had colonies on Mars, mining stations in the asteroid belt, and listening posts at the edge of their solar system. To the Cathar, Earth was nothing more than a speck on a forgotten map. When their long-range scouts first detected radio signals from Sol, they dismissed them as noise from a primitive species. They did not bother to investigate further. Why would they? The galaxy was full of chattering, short-lived civilizations that burned brightly for a few centuries, before collapsing under their own chaos. Humans, they assumed, would be no different. But humans were learning fast. They studied alien transmissions captured by deep space arrays. They reverse-engineered wreckage from ancient derelict ships found drifting near Neptune. They built faster engines, stronger shields, and smarter weapons, not through brute force but through trial, error, and relentless curiosity. While the Cathar relied on genetic perfection and centuries-old tactics, humans adapted. They failed, learned, and tried again. They did not see failure as shame. They saw it as data. Then came the day everything changed. A Cathar scout vessel, the Dreadfang, entered the Sol system without warning. It was sleek and menacing, shaped like a blade with glowing red veins running along its hull. It moved silently through the void, scanning planets, moons, and human outposts with cold efficiency. When it reached Earth's orbit, it broadcast a single message on all frequencies, a deep guttural voice speaking in broken standard, a trade language used by lesser species. Surrender. Your world is now Cathar. Resistance is extinction. The message repeated for 3 hours. Earth's leaders held an emergency session. Panic spread through cities. But in the Sol Conquered's orbital command center, Commander Leo Hayes stood calm. He was a lean man in his 40s with tired eyes and calloused hands from years of ship maintenance and combat drills. He had fought in the last Earth War and carried its lessons like scars. He knew fear, but he also knew when to act. Don't answer them, he told the council. Let them think we're scared. Let them think we're weak. While the Cathar waited for groveling pleas, humans worked in silence. Hidden platforms buried in the moon's craters powered up. Stealth drones detached from asteroid camouflage. Mars redirected its defense grid toward Earth orbit, and deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, a new weapon, designed by a quiet engineer named Danny Ruiz, was loaded into launch tubes. It wasn't a bomb. It was a swarm of micro-missiles, each no bigger than a hand, programmed to seek heat, movement, and energy signatures. The Cathar grew impatient. After 6 hours of silence, the Dreadfang moved closer, positioning itself directly above Geneva, the seat of the Sol Conquered. Its weapons charged. Energy crackled along its hull. The Cathar captain, a veteran named Vorak, prepared to fire a warning shot that would level a city block. He expected screams. He expected surrender. What he got was silence, then fire. From the dark side of the moon, a dozen missiles launched. From orbital docks disguised as solar farms, drones peeled away and accelerated, and from the ocean depths Ruiz's swarm shot into the sky, riding plasma trails into space. The Cathar sensors barely registered the threat before it was too late. The micro-missiles struck first, punching through the Dreadfang's outer shielding like needles through cloth. Then the larger warheads hit, detonating in precise sequence to overload the ship's core. The Dreadfang did not explode in a single fireball. It unraveled. Sections tore apart, atmosphere vented into space. The glowing red veins along its hull flickered and died. Within minutes, the mighty scout vessel was a cloud of debris drifting toward the upper atmosphere, burning up like a dying star. On Xylos Prime, the High Council watched the feed go dark. At first, they thought it was a malfunction. Then they realized the truth. A primitive species had destroyed a Cathar warship without warning, without negotiation, and without mercy. Outrage swept through the Dominion. War drums echoed in the great halls. The Primarch himself declared humanity a pest species, a cancer to be cut out of the galaxy. Fleets were mobilized. Warriors sharpened their blades. The Cathar prepared to teach these upstart humans the price of defiance. But as their dreadnoughts gathered at the edge of known space, something strange happened. For the first time in their history, the Cathar felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't fear, not yet, but it was doubt. And doubt in a species built on absolute certainty was more dangerous than any weapon. Back on Earth, people watched the burning debris fall like shooting stars. Children pointed and cheered. Adults held each other a little tighter. No one celebrated victory, they knew the real storm was coming. But in that moment, standing under the night sky, humanity understood something the Cathar never would. Being small did not mean being weak. Being quiet did not mean being harmless, and sometimes the most dangerous creature in the galaxy was the one everyone ignored. Title: They were considered alpha until humans eradicated them all. Part 2. The Cathar did not wait long to strike back. Within weeks of the Dreadfang's destruction, their retribution fleet emerged from the void beyond Pluto. 3 massive dreadnoughts led the charge, each longer than a city block, their hulls scarred from 100 conquests. Behind them came 12 cruisers, hundreds of fighters and transport ships carrying thousands of elite warriors. The Cathar did not believe in half measures. To them, punishment had to be total, visible, and terrifying. They chose Mars as their first target, not because it was Earth's heart, but because it was close, exposed, and full of human industry. They would crush it, then watch Earth break from despair. On Mars, the human colonies had no illusions about what was coming. After the destruction of the Dreadfang, every settlement went into lockdown. Factories ran day and night. Tunnels were dug deeper into the red rock. Power grids were rerouted, and hidden beneath the rust-colored dunes, engineers buried weapons no one had ever used in open war. Among them was a young woman named Nina Patel. She wasn't a soldier, but a strategist who had spent years studying how weaker forces beat stronger ones. She knew the Cathar would expect open battle, lines of troops, shield walls, direct assaults. So she planned something else entirely. When the Cathar fleet arrived, they found Mars quiet. No signals, no resistance, just silent domes and empty landing pads. Suspicious but confident, they sent drop pods streaking through the thin atmosphere. The pods slammed into the ground near the main colony of New Ares, and from them emerged warriors clad in living armor, their eyes scanning for threats. They moved in perfect formation, weapons raised, voices silent. They expected ambushes, but not like this. The first sign something was wrong came when their comms began to crackle with static. Then their armor systems flickered. Before they could react, the ground beneath them erupted. Not with fire, but with electromagnetic pulses buried deep in the regolith by human hands. The pulses didn't kill, but they fried circuits, scrambled sensors, and shut down the Cathar's advanced targeting systems. Their armor went dark. Their weapons locked up. For the first time, the mighty warriors were blind. Then the drones came. Small, fast, and nearly invisible against the Martian dust storms, hundreds of human-made drones swarmed from hidden vents and caves. They carried no lasers or plasma cannons, just canisters of a specially designed acid, brewed in underground labs by chemists who had studied Cathar biology from the wreckage of the Dreadfang. The acid didn't burn like fire. It ate through the bioplating of their armor like rust through iron, seeping into joints and seams, causing pain the Cathar had never known. The warriors roared in fury and confusion. They swung their massive weapons, smashing drones by the dozen, but for every one destroyed, 3 more took its place. They tried to retreat to their drop pods, but the tunnels collapsed behind them, sealed by remote charges. Trapped in narrow canyons and buried corridors, the Cathar, bred for open field dominance, found themselves fighting in the dark, on uneven ground against an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't understand. Above ground, Commander Leo Hayes coordinated the defense from a mobile command post buried 2 kilometers below the surface. His face was streaked with dust, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. He wasn't trying to win a battle. He was trying to buy time. Every minute the Cathar spent confused on Mars was a minute Earth had to prepare. Every warrior lost here was one less they'd face later. The Cathar commanders, watching from orbit, grew furious. They ordered orbital strikes on suspected human positions. But the surface of Mars was a maze of decoys, fake power signatures, dummy domes, looping audio of human voices. Their weapons hit empty shells while real humans moved unseen through lava tubes and abandoned mines. The Cathar had never fought a war like this. Their doctrine had no answer for deception, for patience, for sacrifice without glory. By the 3rd day, the Cathar ground forces were in chaos. Half their warriors were dead or disabled. The rest were low on supplies, disoriented, and beginning to question their leaders. Back on the dreadnoughts, captains argued over whether to withdraw or glass the entire planet. But the Primarch's orders were clear: no retreat. Victory or death. Then came the final blow. Deep beneath Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system, a team led by engineer Danny Ruiz activated a network of seismic charges. They weren't meant to destroy the mountain. They were meant to shake it. The resulting tremor sent shockwaves through the entire region, collapsing tunnels, triggering dust avalanches, and knocking out the last of the Cathar's landing zones. In the confusion, human snipers, hidden in thermal suits that mimicked rock, picked off officers one by one. Without leaders, the remaining warriors broke formation, something unheard of in Cathar history. From orbit, the Cathar admirals watched their ground campaign collapse. They had lost more warriors in 3 days on Mars than in the last 50 years of expansion. Worse, they had lost face. The galaxy would hear of this. Other species might wonder if the Cathar were truly invincible. Reluctantly, the fleet withdrew. They left behind burning drop pods, shattered armor, and the bodies of their finest. As their ships turned toward deep space, they carried something far more dangerous than weapons: doubt. On Mars, the survivors emerged from the tunnels. They were exhausted, wounded, and grieving, but they had held. They had made the Alphas bleed. And before the Cathar fleet vanished into the stars, human techs managed to hack into a damaged comms array on a downed cruiser. They copied schematics, weak points, energy frequencies, everything they could grab. That data was sent straight to Earth. It showed that Cathar shields failed at a specific harmonic frequency, that their armor joints were vulnerable to certain chemicals, that their command structure relied too heavily on single leaders. It was a blueprint for how to kill a god. Back on Earth, people didn't cheer. They worked. Factories shifted production. Scientists ran simulations. Pilots trained in new tactics. The message from Mars was clear: the Cathar could be hurt. And if they could be hurt, they could be beaten. The war was no longer about survival. It was about ending a reign that had lasted too long. Humanity had drawn first blood. Now they would sharpen their knives. Title: They were considered alpha until humans eradicated them all. Part 3. After the Battle of Mars, humanity did not rest. They knew the Cathar would return, angrier and stronger. But this time, humans were not waiting to be attacked. They took the fight beyond their own system. Using the data stolen from the downed Cathar cruiser, engineers and scientists worked day and night to turn weakness into weapons. At the heart of it all was Danny Ruiz, the quiet engineer who had helped design the acid swarm on Mars. Now, he focused on something even more dangerous: a virus not for bodies, but for machines. The Cathar relied on neural implants to control their armor, weapons, and ships. These implants linked every warrior to a central command network, making their forces move like a single organism. It was their greatest strength and now their greatest risk. Ruiz spent weeks studying the captured comms logs, mapping signal patterns, and testing code in isolated simulators. What he created was a resonance virus, a tiny program that mimicked Cathar command signals but carried a hidden command: disrupt, confuse, overload. He called it Echo. Once inside their network, Echo would cause armor systems to lock up at random, weapons to misfire, and comms to feed false orders. In battle, a Cathar warrior might receive a command to charge forward, while his squad was told to hold position. Chaos would spread faster than fire. While Ruiz worked on Echo, pilot Maya Briggs led a new kind of mission. Small, fast human ships, barely more than armored pods with engines, slipped past Cathar patrols and struck at their supply lines. They didn't try to win fights. They hit fuel depots, ammo caches, and relay stations, then vanished into asteroid fields before the Cathar could respond. Briggs was fearless, with sharp eyes and quicker reflexes. She flew like she was dancing with death, always one step ahead. Her raids cut off reinforcements to the front lines and made the Cathar waste ships chasing ghosts. The Cathar began to feel the pressure. Their warriors, once proud and certain, now hesitated before battle. Rumors spread that human weapons could bypass their armor, that their own tech sometimes turned against them. Discipline, the foundation of their society, started to crack. On one occupied moon, a Cathar captain executed 3 of his own soldiers for cowardice after they refused to enter a tunnel system, fearing another ambush like on Mars. But instead of restoring order, the executions sparked unrest. For the first time, Cathar questioned their leaders. Back on Earth, the Sol Concord used every tool they had, not just weapons, but words. They broadcast messages into Cathar-held space, not in threats, but in questions. Why do you fight for masters who see you as tools? How many of your brothers died so the Primarch could sit on his throne? The messages were simple, repeated often, and slipped into frequencies the Cathar used for routine traffic. Some warriors ignored them. Others listened in silence. Human prisoners became another surprise. When Cathar captured humans, usually scouts or downed pilots, they expected begging, crying, or pleas for mercy. Instead, many humans smiled. Some even laughed. One young medic named Carl Jensen, captured after his ship was shot down near Jupiter, spent his last hours talking to his guards about Earth's oceans and music. Then, when a Cathar officer leaned close to mock him, Jensen triggered a hidden charge in his belt. The explosion killed 3 warriors and left a crater in the prison floor. The Cathar were stunned. They had never met a species that chose death over shame. This pattern repeated across the outer colonies. Humans didn't just fight. They disrupted, confused, and unnerved. They left behind graffiti on captured outposts. You bleed red too. They played old Earth songs over hijacked comms. They turned war into something that Cathar couldn't understand, because it wasn't just about strength. It was about will. On Luna, Commander Leo Hayes reviewed the latest reports. Losses were high, but so was morale. Children on Earth sent drawings to soldiers, stick figures with rifles standing against giant monsters. Schools taught lessons not just on science, but on courage. People saved food, recycled metal, and volunteered for dangerous jobs without being asked. Humanity was no longer scattered tribes. They were one people, united by a common enemy and a shared belief. No one was born to rule them. The turning point came at the Helios Relay, a Cathar communications hub orbiting a dead star. Intelligence said it held the master codes for their entire fleet network. If Echo could be uploaded there, it could spread across the Dominion in minutes. The mission was near suicidal. The relay was guarded by 2 cruisers and a web of drone sentries, but Maya Briggs volunteered without hesitation. She led a team of 5 ships, each loaded with stealth tech and echo-loaded data spikes. They approached in the shadow of a solar flare, engines cold, hulls coated in heat-absorbing paint. For 6 hours they drifted, waiting for the perfect moment. When the Cathar patrol rotated, Briggs gave the signal. Her team struck fast. Drones were jammed, sentry guns overloaded, and Briggs herself docked with the relay, sprinted through its corridors, and planted the virus core in the main server room. She barely made it back to her ship before the Cathar realized what had happened. As she fled, the Echo virus activated. Across the sector, Cathar ships shuddered. Warriors clutched their heads as false commands flooded their minds. One cruiser fired on its own ally. Another drifted off course, systems scrambled. The relay itself went dark. The damage wasn't total, but it was enough. The Cathar High Command went silent for 3 days, trying to contain the breach. In that time, human forces seized 3 outer colonies, freed prisoners, and destroyed 2 more supply hubs. The tide had turned. The hunters were now being hunted, and for the first time, Cathar warriors whispered a new word among themselves. Not alpha, but human. Not with scorn, but with something close to fear. Title: They were considered alpha until humans eradicated them all. Part 4. The final push began with silence. After years of war, humanity gathered every ship, every soldier, every last drop of fuel for one mission: end the Cathar Dominion. Their target was Xylos Prime, the homeworld, the heart of the Empire, the place where every Cathar warrior was born and every order was given. It was heavily guarded, wrapped in orbital shields and surrounded by a fleet that had never known defeat. But humans had learned. They had studied. They had bled, and now they were ready. Captain Eric Dawson stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, humanity's largest warship. He was not a loud man. He spoke softly, moved calmly, and carried the weight of thousands of lives in his eyes. Around him, crew members worked in focused silence. Screens showed fleet positions, shield strengths, and countdown timers. Outside the viewport, hundreds of human ships hung in the void. Fighters, carriers, repair drones, all waiting for his word. Dawson took a slow breath and gave the order. All ships advance. The human fleet moved not in a straight line, but in waves like ripples in water. The first wave was decoys, old freighters packed with signal emitters mimicking the energy signature of capital ships. The Cathar took the bait. Their orbital guns fired, wasting precious power on empty shells. While their attention was drawn, the real fleet slipped through the gaps using asteroid belts and solar flares as cover. On the ground, Lieutenant Zoe Carter prepared for the most dangerous part of the plan. She led a strike team of 12, engineers, medics, and soldiers, tasked with one goal: destroy the Cathar gene forge. Deep beneath Xylos Prime's surface, the forge was where Cathar warriors were made. It held the genetic templates, the growth vats, the control systems that ensured every new generation was stronger, faster, and more obedient than the last. Without it, the Cathar could not replace their losses. Without it, their idea of being alpha would die. Carter's team rode in a stealth lander painted to look like space debris. They dropped through the atmosphere during a massive electrical storm, using the lightning to mask their heat signature. They landed in a dry riverbed miles from the forge entrance. Rain fell in thick sheets, turning the black soil to mud. They moved fast, silent, and low. Every step was a risk. Cathar patrols roamed the area, their sensors sharp, their instincts honed by centuries of dominance. But humans had one advantage the Cathar never expected. They were small. Their bodies gave off less heat, their gear made less noise, and their minds worked in ways the Cathar could not predict. While the Cathar looked for armies, humans sent ghosts. Inside the forge complex, the air was thick with the smell of chemicals and ozone. Towering vats glowed with green fluid, each holding half-formed warriors suspended in stasis. Robotic arms moved with precision, stitching muscle to bone, implanting neural cores, testing reflexes before birth. It was a factory of life, cold and efficient. Carter's team planted charges on the main power conduits, the data cores, and the central control hub. They worked quickly, their hands steady despite the fear pounding in their chests. Then the alarm sounded. A patrol had found their lander. Cathar warriors poured into the complex, weapons drawn, voices roaring in fury. Carter's team fought back with everything they had: pulse rifles, flash grenades, and sheer desperation. 2 of her people fell in the first minute. Another was dragged away by a Cathar's massive hand, but Carter kept moving. She reached the core chamber just as the Primarch himself arrived. He was taller than any Cathar they had seen. His armor fused to his skin, his eyes burning with ancient pride. He did not speak. He simply charged, his blade humming with energy. Carter did not try to fight him. She knew she would lose. Instead, she hit the final switch on her detonator and ran. The charges blew in sequence. First the power grid failed, then the vats cracked, spilling their contents onto the floor. Then the core reactor went critical. The Primarch turned, sensing the shift, but it was too late. The explosion began deep underground. a chain reaction of fire and pressure that tore through the complex like a living thing. Carter barely made it to the surface before the ground collapsed behind her. She ran to the extraction point, lungs burning, legs numb, a dropship hovered low, engines screaming. Her team was gone, but she didn't stop. She jumped, caught the edge, and was pulled inside just as the entire mountain above the forge vanished in a fireball that lit up the night side of the planet. Above, the battle raged. With the gene forge destroyed, panic spread through the Cathar ranks. Their leaders were dead or confused. Their reinforcements would never come. Their belief in their own perfection shattered like glass. Human ships pressed the advantage. Fighters swarmed like hornets. Capital ships fired without mercy. The orbital shields flickered and failed. On the bridge of the Odyssey, Captain Dawson watched the Cathar fleet break apart. Ships turned on each other, some trying to flee, others fighting to the last. It was not a clean victory. It was messy, brutal, and sad, but it was necessary. By dawn on Xylos Prime, the fighting stopped. The Dominion was gone. The Alphas had fallen, not to a bigger army or a stronger weapon, but to a species they had never taken seriously. Humans walked through the ruins not with pride but with exhaustion. They had won, but they had paid a heavy price. And as the sun rose over the blackened towers of the Cathar capital, no one cheered. They simply stood, looked at the sky, and knew the war was finally over. Title: They were considered alpha until humans eradicated them all. Part 5. After the fall of Xylos Prime, silence spread across the stars. Not the silence of emptiness, but the quiet that follows a storm. Tense, heavy, and full of questions. The Cathar Dominion was gone. Their fleets were shattered, their leaders dead, their gene forge reduced to molten rock. What remained were scattered survivors. Warriors without a war, workers without a purpose, and young ones who had never known a world that wasn't ruled by fear. Humanity stood victorious, but they did not act like conquerors. They did not claim the Cathar worlds. They did not tear down the Black Spires or erase the history carved into stone. Instead, they offered something the Cathar had never given anyone: a choice. On a small moon orbiting a quiet gas giant, the Sol Concord built a settlement called Haven. It was not a prison. It was a home for any Cathar who laid down their weapons and agreed to live in peace. At first, no one came. The idea of surrender was unthinkable. But then a single transport arrived, carrying an old Cathar engineer who had once maintained warships. He stepped onto the surface with his hands empty and his head low. He was given food, shelter, and a small workshop. He never spoke much, but he watched the humans closely, studying how they built, how they argued, how they laughed after a hard day's work. Slowly, others followed: a medic who had treated wounded warriors, a pilot whose ship had been disabled in the final battle, even a few young ones born just before the war ended, who knew nothing of conquest. They lived apart at first, wary and quiet. But over time, curiosity replaced fear. Human children left drawings at the edge of the Cathar quarter, pictures of stars, animals, and sometimes strange, smiling aliens. The Cathar did not understand the gesture, but they kept the papers. One day, a young Cathar named Vexa drew something back, a rough sketch of a human and a Cathar standing side by side under a sun. She left it near the schoolhouse. No one spoke of it, but the teacher hung it on the wall. Back on Earth, life returned to something like normal. Cities rebuilt, farms grew again, but the war had changed everything. People no longer saw themselves as just Americans or Europeans or Asians. They were human, united not by blood but by what they had survived together. Schools taught the war not as a story of glory, but as a lesson in humility and strength. Children learned about Danny Ruiz, who built weapons from knowledge, not hate. They learned about Maya Briggs, who flew into darkness so others could see the light. They learned about Zoe Carter, who ran toward fire so her people could live. Statues were raised, but not of generals on horses. They showed engineers with tools, medics with bandages, pilots with helmets under their arms. The message was clear: victory belonged to everyone who refused to give up. In the halls of the Sol Concord, debates raged about what came next. Some wanted to expand, to claim the empty systems once ruled by the Cathar. Others warned that power could corrupt, that humanity must not become what it had destroyed. In the end, they chose caution. They sent science teams, not soldiers. They helped rebuild broken worlds, not to control them, but to heal them. They shared technology with other species who had suffered under the Dominion, not as gifts, but as apologies for arriving too late. Far out in the galaxy, alien diplomats began to speak of humans in hushed tones. Before the war, they had seen Earth as a backwater, a noisy, chaotic planet full of short-lived dreamers. Now they saw something else. They saw a species that did not seek to rule but to endure, that did not roar to be heard but acted when it mattered, that faced gods and did not blink. The phrase, "Beware the humans," spread from port to port, not as a threat but as a warning to tyrants. No throne is safe if humans decide it is unjust. Years passed. The scars of war faded, but the memory remained. On quiet nights, veterans gathered in parks or on ship decks, not to boast, but to remember those who didn't come home. They spoke of friends lost on Mars, in the asteroid belts over Xylos Prime. They told stories not of how they killed, but of how they held on. And in those stories, the Cathar were not monsters. They were a warning, a reminder that believing you are the strongest is the first step toward falling. The last known Cathar Primarch's armor was placed in a museum on Luna, not as a trophy, but as a lesson. Beside it was a simple plaque that read, "They called themselves Alpha. They forgot that even stars burn out." On Haven Moon, the old Cathar engineer finally spoke to a human for the first time. He asked why they had spared his people. The human, a botanist named Lena, looked at the small garden she was tending and said, "Because we know what it's like to be broken, and we know what it's like to be given a second chance." The engineer said nothing, but the next day he helped fix a broken water pump in the human sector. No one thanked him. They just nodded. And that was enough. In the end, humanity did not erase the Cathar from history. They simply proved that being Alpha was never about strength, size, or weapons. It was about heart. And in that, humans had shown the galaxy something new. Not a new ruler, but a new way to live. Not through fear, but through courage. Not through domination, but through choice. And so, under the same stars that once watched the Cathar rise and fall, humanity moved forward not as conquerors, but as guardians of a simple truth. No one is born to rule, and no one is too small to change the universe.